The decision 2 years ago by the state of Georgia to remove the statue of the old politician Tom Watson from the front of the state capitol was cheered by many who were familiar with the politics of that old populist. And somewhere in a celestial newsroom, I'm sure the old editors of the Augusta Chronicle were applauding as well. It didn't start out that way. Tom Watson, who was born into a section of Columbia County that eventually became McDuffie, was a brilliant man. Through eloquence and intelligence, he rose in political power, getting elected to Congress. There, he was a champion of the rural poor and is credited with getting rural free delivery of postal mail passed into law. But politics changed and turned against him, and Watson fought back. Watson and Augusta's newspaper spent 3 decades in a bitter political feud unsurpassed in the Chronicle's history. It began as a political disagreement in the 1890s. Then, U.S. Congressman Watson, previously supported by the Chronicle and its famous editor Patrick Walsh, switched from being a Democrat to a populist. Walsh was furious. He accused Watson of being a grandstand player and a traitor, and of preaching a war of the poor against the rich. When Watson's re-election came up in 1892, the Chronicle switched its support to Major James C.C. Black. It was not only an ugly campaign, but it was also a deadly one. In his editorials, Walsh attributed 3 homicides, including that of a Richmond County deputy sheriff, to Watson-inspired campaign violence. The Democrats defeated Tom Watson, although the voting patterns were obviously suspicious. It could be pointed out that there were more Democrat votes than there were registered voters in Richmond County. Walsh died in 1899, and the next decade saw Watson and the Chronicle bark at each other at every opportunity. For example, the Chronicle once ran a full-page report with the fully capsulized headline, "How Tom Watson Has Abused Practically Every Man of Prominence in America from Christopher Columbus down to Woodrow Wilson." Below it were dozens of comments, most of it critical of just about every judge, educator, and politician in both Georgia and America. Watson called out the Catholic Sisters of Mercy and Booker T. Washington for their perceived transgressions, and his thoughts on the growing movement toward women's suffrage include mild sexual innuendos. Things grew particularly testy, however, when a new Chronicle editor, Tom Loyalist, challenged Watson over the Leo Frank murder trial. Frank, a Jew, had been convicted in Atlanta of the brutal assault and death of a teenage female employee of the pencil factory he managed. Many folks then, and most today, agree that Frank was set up, the victim of a wave of anti-Semitism stirred up across the country. Some said stirred up by Tom Watson. Watson had a nationwide reputation for his published attacks on Catholics, blacks, and Jews, and he really didn't like Frank. When Georgia Governor John Slayton commuted Frank's death sentence, Watson did not respond charitably. Neither did others, and a mob dragged Frank from his prison cell and lynched him. Loyalists in the Chronicle, which had earlier praised Slayton for helping Frank, reacted quickly, demanding that members of the mob be hunted down and brought to justice. Loyalists also blamed Watson for inciting such an act in a Chronicle editorial. He wrote, "Tom Watson has cost Georgia more than 10,000 good and true men can rebuild in 20 years. Loyalists soon left Augusta. Tom Watson ran for the U.S. Senate in 1920 and won. When he died in 1922, the state of Georgia buried him with honors. The Augusta Chronicle also buried its editorial hatchet, writing, "We were diametrically opposed to him, but all is over with him now, and we hope all's well." Sometimes you don't defeat your opponents, you just outlast them. That's what the Chronicle did with Tom Watson.